Up until a few years ago, whenever I got a new guitar student, if they didn't have any prior knowledge, prior experience with the guitar, especially if they were young, I would teach them guitar the classical way. So nylon string instrument, guitar on the left thigh with a footstool, straight back, the classical method. Start with some rest stroke and the classical left hand and simple melodies, going through the strings and arpeggios, and then finally you start playing simple etudes. And, so forth. The classical guitar method, I would basically prepare them for the academia. Now, I studied classical guitar. It's my bachelor's degree, but I always played electric guitar and blues and rock. So there was always this dilemma, which method, to start with a new student. But I believed what they always told me, that classical music is the best ground you can have as a musician. But the more experience I got, the more students that I taught, the more I came into a conclusion that teaching guitar with this classical method right at the beginning is actually not a good service to the student, because the kind of student that comes out from this kind of method is very lonely musically, and he lacks the skills that you need to get by as a musician. So the thing about guitar is that the separation between the classical method and all the rest of the methods and technique is greater than, I wouldn't say than all other instruments, but definitely for most other instruments. To explain what I mean by that, I want us to imagine two hypothetical students, okay? Danny and Anna. Danny started to learn classical piano when he was 8 years old in the classical trajectory. So, finger independence, note reading, the Alfred's notebook, melodies, simple etudes, all the way to, sonatinas and two-hand Bach inventions. Now Danny is 15 years old and he wants to, try and experience different things. He wants to be in a band with his friends. He wants to play, rock or pop or jazz. He wants to improvise and any other genre. Danny would have to work hard, definitely. Would have to learn new musical language, how to accompany songs, how to improvise, how to, work with different keyboard sounds. So he's got some work ahead of him. But the thing is, his basic technique, his superb technique that he acquired through so many years of classical training, will always be there to serve him no matter what genre he chooses to play. The basic mechanics of his hands remains the same. His posture remains the same. The keyboard remains more or less the same. So everything he learned so far continues to serve him. Now let's think about Anna. Anna also started her musical training when she was 8 years old, but she started with classical guitar. And she also went through, the standard trajectory, like I said in the beginning, the classical guitar method. Now Anna, like Danny, is 15 years old. They went to school together, okay, and she wants to be in a band. She wants to play rock, she wants to play blues, she wants to improvise, she wants to play solos. This is a completely different story. For Anna, this is going to take blood, sweat, and tears. Not only does she have to learn a whole new musical language, she also has to radically change her technique, her posture, her entire approach to the instrument has to be changed drastically. The instrument itself, she would have to move from a nylon string guitar to a steel string electric guitar, which is kind of a different instrument. Instead of this kind of posture, she would have to go to this kind of posture, or maybe even standing up. The right hand is maybe the hardest thing, because instead of this kind of thing, playing with your fingers, with your fingernails at this kind of a position, she would have to learn how to strum with a pick, how to do strumming and picking and string bending and string muting and a whole other array of techniques from scratch. I wouldn't go as far as saying this is like learning an entirely different instrument, but it's not that far from that. Honestly, I don't think us guitarists are getting enough credit for this. I don't think people are realizing how technically versatile this instrument really is. I don't think people are realizing that if there is a versatile guitarist that can play a classical piece the classical way and then pick up an electric guitar and play a solo, with a pick, then he's sort of a multi-instrumentalist. Almost. Maybe I wouldn't take it this far, but almost. So it happened to me a bunch of times in places where I taught, in conservatories or in music schools, where another teacher would come up to me and say, hey, we have this ensemble, we're playing, Stevie Wonder, Red Hot Chili Peppers, we're playing this song. We need an advanced guitarist. Do you have any of your students which is an advanced guitarist? And I would say, yeah, definitely. I have advanced students, but then I would think, you know what? Doesn't matter how advanced they are, they're kind of useless in an ensemble. Part of it is the nature of the nylon string guitar, which is very weak, very low volume, and also it's very hard to amplify. But mainly it's the classical technique, which is very much aimed for solo playing. So it's very good at playing multiple parts on one guitar, what Segovia called small-scaled orchestra, playing both the accompaniment and the melody on one instrument. This kind of or if you take a Bach fugue, which is the pride of classical guitar, when you need to play multiple voices on one instrument. So the classical technique is very good at this kind of solo playing, and it can be very beautiful. But what this technique is really, really not good for is playing a groovy accompaniment or delivering a clear, loud, and sometimes fast melodic line. All the things that you want when you have an ensemble. So if you want to play something like, this... and especially the part that comes after this. Forget it. All this. This. The classical technique, the classical posture, the classical instrument are all just very much not suitable for playing this kind of thing. And I know you're probably thinking about all kinds of famous counterexamples. Maybe you're thinking of Matteo Mancuso, which has a very classical right hand and can play pretty much everything. So yeah, it is possible to play all those things with classical technique. It's just 100 times harder. When you teach guitar, you need to think about the average student, not about a guitar god. And even within the classical world, within the classical academia, the classical guitarists are kind of pushed aside. They're, how should I say it, the red-headed stepchild of the classical world. For the rest of the instruments, the classical pianists, the violinists, the classically trained singers, they seem to get all the action. There is this tension, there is this mingling, there's this scuttlebutt all the time, like who's going to get the main role at the Magic Flute production they're doing right now? Who's going to be the lead violinist at this? Who's going to play with who? Who's going to be at this orchestra, at this choir? And the classical guitarists are kind of away from all this. They study their pieces by themselves, they perform by themselves. It's a very lonely experience to be a classical guitarist in the academia. There are exceptions to all this. You have this handful of pieces for classical guitar and orchestra. You have duets and guitar ensembles and a few pieces for voice and classical guitar. But, I can tell you from experience, I was a classical guitarist in the academia, and I can tell you that 95% of what classical guitarists do is playing by themselves with themselves. They're alone when they're practicing, they're alone when they're performing. Andre Segovia tried to make the guitar a respected classical instrument. That was his life work, and I think in hindsight we could say he had a very partial success. So yeah, this is my reasoning for why I stopped teaching classical guitar as a default, because I came into a conclusion that it puts the student in a very lonely box, that is very hard to come out of, because you're teaching them a method, a technique which is very good for solo playing but is very bad for playing with other people. And after so many years in music, you understand that the real thing in music is when you play with other people. That music is first and foremost a conversation, a way to communicate, to create music with other people is such a wonderful way to communicate with them. And it's just a shame to take this very valuable skill of playing with other people and to make it so difficult for the student and to essentially put them in a very lonely box. So this is not about a musical genre or a different kind of music. I still love the classical guitar. I still play classical guitar. This is about giving the student the skill that he needs to play with other people. So this was my take. I would love to read what you think about it. I can't help but thinking that if I had a bigger channel, then I would get probably sore hands to make a reaction video and to destroy all my arguments. Oh well, like and subscribe to help my channel get bigger, and maybe together we'll draw sore hands' attention. See you in the next video. See you next time. See you later. Bye.